Lynn, it's so good to be with you this morning. We've already been having such a great conversation about what you do for a living. You are a professional organizer, and so we thought it would be very appropriate to have a conversation with you during this sermon series that we're in. Pastor Andrew is currently preaching a sermon series on what comes next. And what that is how Christians think about death and the afterlife. And so having a conversation with you this morning is really important as we think about what comes next. So if you could just share again a little bit about that and what it is that you do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very passionate about what I do because the need is great. And I started out in a real estate career, and while I was selling some of the older people's houses, they would ask me to help them downsize because they knew that I was organized. So that's kind of what led to that, and then it's really just exploded because, like I said, the need is great. My goal is. Or what I'm passionate about is for people always to be ready for what's next, and in order to do that, you have to be intentional. And so we make plans for about everything in our lives. We make our financial plans, we make our end of life plans, but people tend to not plan what to do with all of their belongings, all the things that they've accumulated. And so my goal is to help people be ready by making those plans, being intentional about it.
Okay, so you mentioned so that the things that we hold on to, right? The things of this world that are so important to us for so many different reasons. Mm-hmm. And you were just showing me a picture of a gentleman who had a lot of items that he made, and in talking with you a little while ago and reading some of the stuff that you've written, you talk a lot about, artwork, and there are certain things that people, and maybe you found this, there's certain things that people have a harder time letting go of. And so talk to us about that and tell us what's the hardest part of your job.
The hardest part is helping people decide what to do with that kind of stuff. And when people wait too late that's when it gets overwhelming and too stressful for them. And most people do. We tend to procrastinate because it's not, for some reason, our society doesn't really teach us that. Our culture teaches us to accumulate and to do and be and become, and with all of that comes stuff. Whether it's the awards and the trophies, but it's also, it's natural. If you're an artist, you need to paint and draw but the hard part is giving it and, doing whatever you're going to do with it. And rather than just kind of stacking it up, and I do find a lot of that just stacked up, and they reach their golden years and it's still stacked up, and they've already given or they've already sold what they could, and then what's left is just a lot of baggage. And that's hard, and sometimes it's especially hard for the spouse. So let's say the artist passes, and the spouse is left to deal with it. And I have literally watched the spouse have to tear the pictures up while they cried, and throw them in the dumpster while they cried, because when you've given everything away that you can give away, when you've sold everything you can sell, you can't take the stuff to Goodwill. You can't just donate it. You have to destroy it. And that's hard.
Yeah, I can imagine that's very hard.
And there's a lot of waste involved.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's and I think the hardest part is when people realize that their family, their other people don't value the things that they value. So that's the hardest part.
That you bring that up. That's so interesting because, speaking from personal experience, I've had 2 sets of grandparents now pass on. I've also had my parents who sold our childhood home. They then purchased an RV, and so now all of their, so they were going through all of their stuff, and I mean, they're very early 60s, and so for us kids, my brothers and I, it's good that they're doing this, and they've now downsized so much. I mean, they downsized their whole entire house, but guess where a lot of their stuff went? Yes. Hey, these are yours, and you should take these, Jen, and Michael, these are yours, and don't you want this whole garage full of stuff? And so that's such a good point, because it's so much of it is valuable to them. Very many of our childhood things they've not wanted to get rid of, and so then, for those of us who are on the receiving end of parents, or grandparents who are needing to let go of their things of this world, what are we supposed to do with that? Because as you said, it may not be as valuable to us as it is to our parents and our grandparents.
Well, there's several aspects. When I'm dealing with the parent, I encourage them not to transfer their baggage to their kids, because and sometimes I don't even have to go there. They will tell me, my kids don't want it, and that's the reality.
But is that hard?
It is.
Do they take that very hard, that their children don't want it?
They do take it hard, and so that's why I encourage people to live a lifestyle of downsizing. We live in an over-consumer culture. It's way too easy to accumulate, and it's hard to get rid of stuff. And so, so I encourage people to, in fact, downsizing throughout the stages of life. That's kind of my motto. We should always be downsizing. We should always be reevaluating stuff, not just not hoarding, really. And you don't have to be what I call a true hoarder to be hoarding. It's hanging on to stuff long after it's served its purpose. So let go of things when it's time.
So what do you think that people's possessions represent to them?
Well, I think it represents what they've done in life and their identity. And I think we, as a church, maybe need to do a better job of letting people know that our identity is in Christ and not in the things that we have. I tell people that the things have a shelf life. And so focus on the things. In fact, one of my favorite sayings is, if you don't love it or use it, lose it. And we shouldn't love anything that can't love us back.
Interesting. My category of love would be a whole lot of stuff. So let's talk about the identity and our identity in Christ, and what that looks like. So if you would take a marathon runner, for example, and oftentimes we want to have this trophy wall, right? And we buy these pegboards, and we hang all of our medals, on these pegboards, and so that is, and there's a room, so there's a location where these medals are hanging, okay, and that represents. That's my identity. That's who I am and who I've been. So when I'm 80 years old, and what am I going to do? I'm going to save those and put them in a box, because that is once saying that, look how many marathons I ran, and look what I did, and that's who I am right there. I'm a marathon runner, and that's the proof of it, right? And so, but what I hear you saying, and what is so very true, is that that's not who I am. I'm a daughter of the King. I'm a child of God, and that's my identity. So, and God loves me, like you just said. You know, don't hold on to things that can't love you back. Well, those medals are not loving me back,
Right.
but Jesus is loving me
Exactly.
back. You know, and so talk to me about that a little bit.
Okay. Yes, and it is important and to have those memories, because that's part of who we are. And so the one thing that I do, another thing that I encourage people to do is, if you're putting it in a box, then that's not giving it a place of honor. You're not valuing it. So if it's important to you, give it a place of honor. So and that's my way of saying, you know, the awards have a time frame. They have a shelf life, or I call it an expiration date. In fact, another thing I say is, everything has an expiration date except the Word of God and the souls of mankind.
That's so good.
So I try to get people to focus on things like that and not focus so much on the things. I don't want them to forget about the things, because that is, you know, that's what they've done here on earth.
Sure.
Okay? But I want them... So one thing that I would encourage people to do is take pictures. So in fact, when they unpack the box of trophies, because you know, after a period of time, there's only so much room. You only have so much space to put the trophies. So eventually, they end up in a box. Sometimes in the attic.
Or in a storage shed.
Right.
That you've rented and paid for.
Yes, exactly. And so I ask them the question, I said, when you got the trophy, did they also take a picture of you? And then they say yes. And I say, is that good enough? So you don't have to keep the trophies. Eventually, the trophies go away. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, sometimes they go to the landfill. Most of the time they go to the landfill, because even the kids don't want all of your trophies, because they have their own. So my whole mission is to help people live intentionally and to not let the stuff of this world distract them from what's really important, which is your eternal soul, and your relationship with your family and and Christ.
So that's a great segue. So let's talk about, you know, how does faith in Jesus play a part in all of this? You know, when you're going into people's homes and, you know, estate sales and things like that, what has your experience been? You know, with Christians, and is there a difference there that you see? You know, if you're with a family who are Christians and have faith in Jesus, is there a difference between them and what they're holding on to and regarding so highly, the stuff, as opposed to maybe those who don't appear to have a faith in Jesus? Is there a difference there?
There is. There definitely is. For me, it's kind of sad. Well, no, it's definitely sad when they don't have a faith, when they don't have a purpose. I mean, I have the opportunity to witness to people, and I take that opportunity and I quote scripture and things like that. But for the person who does have faith, I try to lead them in that direction. That it's not about the stuff. The stuff's going to go away. You can't take it with you, and you wouldn't want to. Most of us wouldn't want to, right?
Right.
So
that's a very famous saying, isn't it? You can't take it with you. We often speak of, you know, preparing to die, and a phrase that I've talked about and learned about so much is, how do we die well? So what does that mean for you? And talk to me about the transition. Are there different stages to this? What do those stages look like? And so how do we do it well?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, if my parents have already done a lot of that, but if I were to think about my in-laws,
Mm-hmm.
how would I talk to them about preparing and dying well? And how do we do that? What are the different stages?
I'm working on that. I'm having to have that conversation, and that's, I'm actually working on another book. I'm staying so busy I don't have time to write a book, but but my next book will be Live More with Less.
Okay.
And the whole topic is downsizing throughout the stages of life. So having that, it is hard. It is very hard to have that conversation, because sometimes the tables almost turn, and the child becomes more of the parent, and that's hard. That is very hard for most parents to let those tables turn, but eventually it does, and I get to be in the middle of a lot of that, but what I try to do is, I think probably the best, or one of the best approaches, is for you to do it well, for our age group to do it well, and to kind of almost demonstrate to our parents that we're downsizing, and we're making sure that that we don't have stuff that we haven't used in 20 years. Another thing that I do is, and this might be helpful, is I give people a good reason to let go of things. So I participate in a lot of nonprofits, whether it's I like our church, His Helping Hands Clothes Closet.
Mm-hmm.
I love that they give the clothing away; they don't sell it, so that's a big thing. But to help them to see that somebody else needs it, and so give them a good reason to let it go. But we do have to have those conversations, and we have to let them know that we don't want it. And but what your parents did really was good. That's what I encourage people to do. To when they say, "Oh, I'm giving that to, I'm saving that for my daughter," then I say, "Well, let's call them up and take a picture and see if they really want it. Because if they don't, you don't need to be hanging on to it. Let somebody else enjoy it." So I try to find a way to let them realize that they're blessing someone else with the stuff that they no longer need.
That's great. So you are not only a professional organizer, but I feel as though you're also a counselor and a coach.
Absolutely.
In that regard. But people need that. I think, the whole family at large needs that advice and that encouragement. And I have no doubt that you're a very big encourager, but yet you can do it in a very decisive way that they need. And how about family heirlooms? What does that look like? And how are people supposed to let go of certain things that may have been passed down from generation to generation? And do we let go of those things, or would you continue to pass those down? And let's talk about that.
Well, sometimes, but that younger generation is changing, and they're not collecting things the way that the older generation have been, and so those heirlooms don't mean the same thing. Another thing that I encourage people to do is to tell their story. because I think our stories are not going to get told because we don't sit around on the front porch drinking tea and telling our stories anymore. We're too busy with our devices, right?
Sure.
And so I encourage, especially when memory issues develop. If you and a lot of those heirlooms, I tell people digitize them. So take a picture and write a book about your family's history, because and it's so easy to do these days, right? Very easy. You can do it online for next to nothing and give copies to everybody in the family, so that the china that was your great grandmother's, that is just collecting dust, those kinds of things, the family heirlooms. But unfortunately, back to your question, the kids don't generally want them because they're not collecting things, and that's a good thing.
That is a good thing. I have so many questions for you right now. This interview could go on for an hour. So as soon as you said about this generation not collecting things, okay, but in my mind, as you're saying this, the only thing I can think about is driving around town and seeing all of these storage units and these storage facilities, with dozens of, and I mean heated and air conditioned, and what is that? I mean, why do we have so much stuff that we're having to purchase units outside of our home even to hold all of this stuff that we accumulate?
It's our culture that places value on getting and being and doing, and all of that comes with it. And we're not taught to let go of things. We're taught to accumulate. I mean, I tell people, I say, the marketers are spending a gazillion dollars to make sure that we know about their product, and guess what? It's working. So that's where we as Christians have to change the culture of get and not get rid of when it's time, or not give. So and it's hard because I think our economy is dependent upon us being over consumers, and so I don't even try to address that. What I try to address is, don't hang on to everything forever. You can't do it. Eventually, unfortunately, it ends up in the landfill.
Sure.
And it costs a lot of money. I tell people, purge early, purge often, or pay dearly. And I see people paying dearly every day. And I see people paying dearly in that recently I did an estate, and when it was all said and done and Salvation Army took 2 truckloads, the gentleman, his wife passed, he took what he needed to move to a smaller place. His kids took what they wanted. Salvation Army took 2 truckloads. We took several loads to donate, trailer loads to donate. And this isn't even a huge house. Several loads to the dump, and then the final pickup to go to the landfill cost him $1,350 just to take his trash.
Oh my goodness.
So when I say purge early, purge often, or pay dearly, I mean it.
Literally.
Yes. But another way that people pay dearly is in their relationships, because I get the call from the child who lives in another state and their parent lives here, and there's anger in their voice. And so a lot of times those end estates, they're not as fun, because you don't get to when I do just regular organizing, then there's a sense of accomplishment and joy, and I get such a good feeling helping people organize their spaces. But those estates at the end when people waited too late, it's nobody's happy. The people aren't happy. And the other thing that I have discovered, and that is that when people do it well, so they downsize as a daily activity, because we're always bringing stuff in. We need to make sure stuff's always going out, that we're not over accumulating. But when people do it well and they make the decisions for themselves, they're in control, they transition well to that next season of life, whether it's to go on the road and go in an RV, or go to a retirement home, or just to a smaller place with less stuff to manage. They transition well. The ones who wait till the bitter end, to the 11th hour, and it has to happen for them. They can't do it themselves. They're not happy. They don't transition well. And I've had people who literally left their home one day and had an accident and never came home. They went to a nursing home or somewhere else. And so someone else, a stranger, had to make the decisions about their stuff. And that those people don't live that final season of their life well. So that's why my goal is to have people do it as it's a daily activity, just like anything else. That our attachment to stuff keeps us from living well. It's a distraction.
It's a distraction.
It is a distraction.
You're right. So I would imagine that if we're doing this every day, or we're at least having that mindset.
Yes.
I would imagine that there's a sense of closure that a person can get. So in my mind, I would just be thinking about my grandparents. And I do believe that they did it very well. So they lived a life of parsonage living. So, every few years, they couldn't accumulate a lot of stuff to begin with.
Okay.
Because they were every, 5, 7, whatnot years, moving from parsonage to parsonage. Then they came to a point where when my grandfather retired from ministry, they moved into a United Methodist retirement community. So it was another downsize at that point. But I can remember going over to their apartment in the retirement community. And then there was another downsize after that when my grandmother needed to go into a dementia unit. And then my grandfather wanted to move with her, but then again, a smaller apartment. But I can remember sitting with them and having really great conversations. And it could have just been a shoebox that had just some items in it that they wanted me to have, or at least that I would consider taking, although, that becomes an awkward conversation because for me, I always just hesitated saying, I don't want that, or, so I'm just like, thank you, and you take it. And many times I've been grateful for some of those things, especially now. I mean, I have cassette tapes of my grandfather's sermons that he preached, and notes that he took, and trinkets that church members gave him, and whatnot. And so I that's why I was talking about those family heirloom type things.
Yes.
Now, will my kids cherish any of that? I don't know, but I do, and so I will hold on to that for a little while. But all of that to say, I now looking back on it can sense that there was a closure that my grandparents were getting at each different stage that they transitioned into. And so when it finally came to the end for them, their last transition, they really didn't have anything. They really, truly didn't. And so it was, that's why I said, I believe they did it well. And they had
Yes.
let go.
Right. That's the perfect word. I want people to let go when it's time to let go. In fact, a quote from Sam Keen, and he says, "The wise person knows what time it is in their lives." Okay,
That's a good
and
quote.
so really, it's really about knowing when it's time. Like I keep going back to the word intentional. We need to be intentional about everything and about the stuff, and I love the fact that the items that your grandparents passed to you were in a shoebox. Unfortunately, sometimes it's the whole storage unit.
Oh, I can imagine.
So yes, or it's in the attic deteriorating. Okay, so just falling apart. So I want people to value important things in their lives, but I want them to value it, not just stick it somewhere and let it fall apart. And that's what I see far too often, because we need to value the things that really do bring us joy. But and that's the other thing about writing down your story. So for instance, you could take some of those items in that box and write about it, and then maybe it will be more significant to your kids because it was significant to you, because it was significant to your grandparents. So I want people to value the things that we should, and but in the end, the most important thing is our souls, and our eternal home. So I tell people, of course, Matthew 6:19, don't store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. So it's really about storing up treasures in heaven.
That's good. That's so true. And so those are those conversations that you have with people, that you're able to witness to the Christian faith when you're doing some of this. And that's really important, because you're right, that is what at the end of the day, and when we draw our last breath here on earth, that's what it's about.
Right.
It's not about all the stuff we accumulated over the years, and how many storage units we have.
Right.
And one thing I wanted to go back to that you said is, so if a person has not come to terms with nearing the end of their life, and either because they just refuse to think about it, or because it brings so much pain and grief to them, and then you have a situation where a person, and I'm sure you've seen this, where a person has lived in their home for 45 years and never has touched any of their stuff. Okay, and so if this were to happen to me, and say one of my parents both passed on, then who's it left to? So then it's left to me and my brothers. And you mentioned about relationships, and I wonder, I don't know that I've ever seen it firsthand, but I'm sure you have. And so then you have all of these children and siblings coming into the picture, and how do you deal with that if they're not seeing eye to eye? So and so should get this, so and so should get this, we don't want that, no, I want that. I mean, how do you
I kind of step back on that. I'm very careful about handling people's stuff well, because a lot of times, like I'm working on one right now, and the kids are all far away. So I'm very I take the time to make sure that I honor everybody's wishes to the best of my ability. But I do try to step out of that, because people do put a lot of value on stuff. And so I've been very fortunate in that I have never gotten myself in trouble over mishandling, if I understand your question, mishandling where stuff goes. So I let them all decide that.
You just let them fight it out.
Oh, and honestly, they haven't really, there's not really been any fighting.
That's good.
I can honestly say that most of the time that it's like, no, we don't want it. Because everybody has their own stuff. Now, they do want some things, trust me. They do. And, you know, sometimes I've been in a situation where the kids took, one particular kid took too much, and I had to tell him, I guess I'll be coming to your house next. And it's true. I mean, you know, that unfortunately that does happen sometimes, but I kind of step back on that because I don't want to get in trouble. I want to fulfill my job and help them whatever they're getting ready to do, whether it's just to organize things better, get rid of some stuff, or if it's the final, we're moving somewhere else much smaller. We need to get rid of stuff. And I have, in fact, yesterday, I moved stuff to a storage unit for some people.
Did you?
And it was a lot of artwork. And I know that unfortunately some of that artwork's going to sit there until it falls apart. So that's.
But you did what they hired you to do, and you organized for them.
Yes.
There's something nostalgic and wonderful feeling about, I like to go into the local antique stores and whatnot, and there's just something so warm and fuzzy feeling that you get inside when you're walking through these antique stores and there's a toy that you used to play with.
Yes.
You know, or there's sets of dishes that, you know, in your mind, you're like, oh, my grandma had those, we used those, or just, I love that. And that's a testament to say, there is this feeling that we get to be able to have some of these memories, but also to say, I can look on Facebook and someone can post, you know, one of those memes that says, if you grew up in the 80s, you'll remember this, you know, and then I click on it and I get all excited and yes, I had that and I had that and my brother had that, my buddy doll, and, you know, and so all that to say, I can get the same feeling from a picture. Like what you just said, it's so good because you still have that nostalgic feeling, that memory is still called to mind. So there's a lot of weight there in what you're saying about digitalizing things for memories.
Yeah.
And I love what you said too about storybooking things.
Yes.
Journaling, sitting with our grandparents and loved ones or parents and having those conversations.
Right.
Tell me about this, or you know, and we write them down. That's real good too.
Yes.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. I definitely encourage that. In fact, when I leave here, I'll be meeting with a lady she was a writer actually, and so writers have a hard time because they have a lot of stories, you know, and those are hard to get rid of, but eventually, you know, there's just not enough time in the day to go through all the stuff that we have accumulated.
Oh my goodness.
And so, but I keep going back to, I want people to value what's important. And so just make it more about relationships and your relationship with Christ. And as we age, our energy decreases, sometimes our mobility and our energy. I already said the energy and our motivation. So our mobility, our energy, and our motivation decreases. People just don't realize that when they're thinking, "Oh, I'll do that another time." Well, they don't feel like doing it, and so it makes it very hard on the older person. So that's why it's important to do it while I tell people, do it while it's easy and you are in control. You will enjoy the process better, and it'll be less stressful. Just don't wait till the 11th hour. Don't wait till sometimes people wait till it's an emergency, and they don't get to be in control, and they're not happy. They're not happy. They don't get to decide who gets their stuff.
I think as that time draws near for all of us. The relationships, like you said, with those around us are so important, but ultimately our relationship with Jesus and our constant focus of salvation and we sang this song in worship this past Sunday, and when we all get to heaven. And so it's like, if we could just keep that mindset, right, of when we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing it will be. You know, when we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Like if we could only but just realize all of these things that we're collecting here on earth are just temporary.
Very temporary.
And but our relationship with Jesus and when we get to heaven is forever. You know, if we could just
and the stuff that we are having to spend all of our energy on is a distraction from that. So let go of the things when it's time, and so you can focus on what's really important. So that's why I do what I do.
Well, I think it's great that you do what you do, and the Lord's called you to that, and you have an awesome testimony and story to share. So thank you for talking with me this morning and for being willing to be a part of this sermon series that we're doing.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Lynn.
It's been great.
Yes.
Okay.